Welcome to the Fantasy Zone. Get ready. Ouch!
Phantasy Zone in 1986 was Sega's answer to the recently released Konami arcade game Twin B. Unlike most shooters at the time, featuring spaceships and science fiction settings, these shooters are often referred to as cute-em-ups, feature bright and colorful settings with cute and in many cases very bizarre and out-of-place enemies. The arcade game was a success for Sega, and they licensed the game to almost all home consoles at the time. The only console port developed by Sega themselves, though, was the Master System. For anyone unfamiliar with the Master System, it was one of Sega's 8-bit consoles designed to compete with the Nintendo Entertainment System and the first Sega console to be released outside of Japan. It was sold in Japan, North America, Europe, and parts of South America such as Brazil, where it received software officially all the way until 1998, the same year that the Dreamcast was released. Phantasy Zone came to the Master System in 1986, only 8 months after the arcade original. In fact, Sega released an entire series of Phantasy Zone games on the Master System. The sequel, Phantasy Zone 2: The Tears of Opa-Opa, saw a release a year later. Phantasy Zone: The Maze, a game more like Pac-Man than Phantasy Zone, was also ported to the Master System. This game is sometimes called Opa-Opa in the arcades as well. This game has a text scroll introducing the plot in a very similar way to Star Wars, indicating that the game takes place long ago in a faraway space. Yet the year listed is 6216, so they're either referring to 6216 BC, or the narration takes place somewhere in the future of that year, even farther into our future. A solar system known as the Phantasy Zone, and yes, it is the same Phantasy Zone mentioned in Space Harrier, a Sega Superscaler released a year earlier. The interplanetary monetary system has collapsed, and all the planets in the Phantasy Zone are in crisis. The monetary system has collapsed because an enemy, known as the Menon, are stealing foreign currency of the other planets to construct a giant fortress. I'm not sure how that collapses their monetary system, but whatever. The whole planetary economy storyline seems very convoluted and actually kind of boring. It's also reminiscent of the plot for Star Wars Episode 1. I wonder if George Lucas was playing Phantasy Zone while he was writing The Phantom Menace. That may explain where the whole Trade Federation plot came from. Anyways, Opa-Opa, a living spaceship with legs, is a hero of the Phantasy Zone. He sets out to defeat whoever is controlling the Menon and save the Phantasy Zone from financial ruin or an attack from the giant fortress that they're building. Not 100% sure, the game was a little vague about details of this plot. As for the game itself, the graphics are incredibly colorful to the point where it puts systems like the NES to shame. The TurboGrafx 16 and arcade are technically better graphics-wise, but this version is very colorful and vibrant. It's these kind of graphics that make the Master System look almost arcade-like. Sadly, like most Master System games, there's only a single background layer with no animation or parallax scrolling at all. The game is also letterboxed with a large border around the entire screen. By shrinking the screen size like this, the gameplay is able to run without any slowdown. So I feel like this is a fair trade-off. One place where the Master System does outdo the arcade with the graphics is in the status bar. In the arcade, the status bar takes up a quarter of the screen, but the Master System, it only takes up a very small part of the viewing window. In order to defeat the Menon, you'll have to destroy all 10 of the Menon bases in each of the 5 different stages, with each stage representing a planet in the Phantasy Zone. After that, there's a 6th stage where you must complete a boss rush, fighting all of the bosses from the previous stages, then coming face to face with the leader of the Menon. I won't spoil it to anyone who hasn't gotten that far, but this encounter will have lasting repercussions on our hero, Opa-Opa. I do have to note that this is one of the very first games to feature a boss rush mode or a boss rush stage. This wasn't done very often back then. In fact, I haven't found any other examples that predate this, so this may be the first one. Now the gameplay is simple. You use the direction pad to move Opa-Opa in any direction on a horizontal playfield that wraps, similar to games like Defender. If Opa-Opa is flying, he'll slowly move horizontally in whatever direction he's currently facing if you aren't pressing any of the directional buttons. And he'll stay motionless if you're standing on the ground. You shoot your primary weapon with the 1 button and drop bombs with the 2 button. Sadly, there is no rapid fire in this game, so I would highly recommend either using the Sega Rapid Fire unit or a Genesis Turbo controller like the Mega Fire controller, so you don't end up with a sore thumb constantly tapping the button. This game is also compatible with all Sega Genesis controllers and the Sega Sports Pad, so plug that one in if you want to control Opa-Opa with a trackball instead of the D-pad. Your goal is to destroy the 10 bases, then kill the boss. Bases, which seem to be sentient beings themselves, will drop money after you kill them that you need to collect in order to buy upgrades and extra lives in the shops. There is a catch though, as the amount of money they drop decreases the longer you take in the stage. Money drops start at $1,000 in the stage as stage 1 begins, but it can get as low as $50 if you take too long. The only downside to graphics in this game that I found is that on some stages, especially the ice world, the bases blend into the background way too much, and I ended up running into them, accidentally dying a lot early on in the game, not realizing that they were not part of the background layer. Enemies also roam the levels, and they're out to get you. Luckily, they stand out from the backgrounds a lot more than some of the bases. Enemies will also drop money sometimes after you destroy them. Some enemies are deployed by the bases themselves, and others will just spawn off screen and enter the screen to attack you. Each enemy has a unique sprite to distinguish them, and they're all very colorful and unique. They also have unique patterns of movement and projectile attacks. There's 22 different types of enemies, and you'll need to learn many of their patterns to survive. Luckily, the instruction manual gives you some hints as to how they'll attack you. You need to be very careful, as the game features only one-hit deaths, and the enemy patterns seem always to be a little bit random. The bosses are giant and take up a large portion of the screen. Unlike the arcade, the screen blacks out and the background is just a solid color. This is because to make enemies this big, the Master System draws the bosses as the actual background layer. You'll fight them on a single screen, and they have set predictable patterns of attack. A few of them are actually unique to the Master System, like the level 4 boss. These boss fights turn the game into almost a bullet hell, where you'll be dodging intricate patterns of bullets, sometimes covering almost the entire screen. Finally, there are the shops. This is something that polarizes a lot of people either into loving the game or hating the Phantasy Zone series. A shop will appear twice in each level. In the shop, you can buy engines to increase your speed, upgraded primary weapons like a wide shot or a 7-way shot, single-use bomb upgrades, as well as extra lives. Except for the engines, all of the weapon upgrades have a limited time duration. Then, after it's up, you return back to your regular gun. Prices seem pretty low and reasonable at first, but every time you buy an item, it becomes more expensive the next time you visit the shop. There's actually a glitch in this version of the game where if you buy all 4 of the engine upgrades and you don't use them, the weapon timer on your upgraded weapon doesn't count down and you keep the upgrade until the end of the stage, but the weapon does reset when you enter the next one. If you're new to this game or not very good at dodging bullets, I would highly suggest to spend your money on extra lives anytime you can, as the game only starts you out with 3 lives and there are no continues whatsoever. The game is actually pretty short, being only 6 levels that can take only a few minutes each, so I feel that having no continues is kind of fair for the length of the game. And as an experienced player, you could get through the game in a good 20 minutes. Other than the extra lives, make sure you always have at least the basic jet engine. Otherwise, Opa-Opa will be far too slow to dodge most of the projectiles and enemies coming at him, especially in later stages. Overall, this is a fun shooter. The game is difficult, but due to the lack of continues, but nowhere near as tough as some other shooters out there. So don't go into this thinking that it's going to be Truxton or Musha levels of difficulty. It took me a few hours to get to the final stage, and maybe about and maybe about 10 attempts at the final level to finish the game. Also, because of the short length, it's a great game to return to if you only have a few minutes to spare. I'll every once in a while pop this game into the Master System and play it when I have maybe 10 to 15 minutes to spare. It is a fun game, and there's a little bit of replay value, although given how short it is, it's not that much replay value, sadly. But if you like shooters and cute graphics, this game is definitely for you. And even with today's rising game prices, this game runs less than $30 for the cartridge and around $40 complete in the box. Alright, so before I finish up this review, there's one last thing I wanted to mention, and that is the music for Phantasy Zone. The music for both the arcade and the Master System are amazing. The tunes are incredibly catchy, there's a whole ton of them, and it even sounds really good on the Master System. The PSG sound chip reproduces these songs incredibly, and like I said, they're really catchy. There's a different track for every single one of the levels, as well as the boss, and the boss music is the only one that's actually repeated throughout the entire game. And there's also a little Easter egg for you here. If you have a copy of Phantasy Star IV for the Sega Genesis and you beat the game and you have a save game for a completed run, you can access a secret sound test mode, and in there are all the tracks for the game, all the music tracks, and included in there, mixed in, is a Phantasy Zone track from level 1. So I'll leave the video with that track, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks a lot for watching.